Hello, and welcome to The Resource, the podcast propelling employer brands to recruit smarter and retain better. I'm your host, Priscilla Peters.
And I'm your other host, Scott Dismuke. And Priscilla, here we are. It's springtime. We've got
Madness.
March Madness is getting ready to start.
Go.
Yeah, I actually heard something the other day. I heard a report that, and I can't remember if it was the Wall Street Journal or where it's from, that March Madness sometimes has an effect of a loss of like $20 billion to the American economy because of lost production at work. I said that. Yeah. I said that during our staff meeting this morning, and everybody kind of looked at one another like, me, I don't watch the games. I'm like, yeah. So $20 million. That's a lot of money.
And somehow the Razorbacks snuck in. We just snuck in by the hair of our chinny chin chin.
Yeah, we got to play Kansas in the first round, which will probably have already happened by the time this airs.
Yeah. I'm predicting a loss, but we'll see. I did get us, I can't remember my bracket. I think I did pick us to beat Kansas and then lose to St. John, but we'll see.
I have not filled out my bracket yet. I will tell you
about 48 hours.
I know. I will tell you, I probably will have Florida winning it all.
I did too.
Yeah. I think they're playing extremely well right now.
They're going to lose in the first round. Our listeners are listening to this right now and going, y'all are so dumb. Why would you pick
know
them?
Anything. Yeah. So, and I don't say that because, we do, the friend of the show, friend of the resource, Bruce Pearl.
Yeah, this is true.
So I still kind of have to, pull for him unless they're playing the Razorbacks. But
they're the number one seed. Like they're the number one seed, right?
Top seed.
Yeah, they're the one to beat. So, and you can better believe he's got them ready. I mean, they have had a great year. So that it's going to be fun to watch either way. I can't wait. I cannot wait. Yeah.
So real quick, kind of give me some of your, last time we recorded this, we had just kind of finished up R&R, but now you've kind of had a chance for the dust to settle. What kind of buzz are you getting post R&R?
Yeah. So it's been great. We, you know what the biggest feedback is, and it's like this every year. And we've actually even had talks of adding more of this, but folks really we do those networking roundtables, and so many people are like, that should be extended. We've already extended it once. We've added 2 workshops that are smaller versions of that, but really just being able to sit around a small table and talk about topics related to recruiting and retention with your peer, your people that do what you do, but you can't. And so that was a big, takeaway that we got back. Just the data itself, they always like the data that they can take back to their teams and kind of benchmark against that. So we've had a lot of follow-ups for that, but yeah, we're, believe it or not, we start working on 2026 in July. So we don't get much of a break, and we're already planning on where we're going to have it 27 and 28. So here we are, no rest for the weary over here, Scott Dismuke.
That's exactly what I was getting ready to say. So you mentioned the data. Obviously, on the resource, we start every episode with 2 must-know data points and resources that will keep you ahead of the curve in recruiting and retention. So, Priscilla, what kind of data do you have for us today?
Yeah, so this is interesting. So last month, we launched a new product called CallWorks Conversation Analytics. So super high level, what it is it's an AI-driven recruiter scorecard. It listens to phone calls between recruiters and drivers, and then the AI scores the call based on what you tell it. And anyway, it delivers. And so I was looking at some of the information that came out of our beta that we had with this particular piece of technology. And I asked our product team, hey, what is the average score for recruiters? So we listened to, all these calls between recruiters and drivers. So if you're giving a scorecard, tell me what the average score is. So out of 100, the average score is 61. So that's on the grade scale, that would be a D, right? Yes.
Yeah, I would know that. I would know that very well. 61 is definitely a D.
You're a D student? Is this what I'm hearing? I'm just kidding.
I'm not going to say that. I'm just saying I know what a D is.
But and so I'm like, oh my goodness, it's a 61. And they said, yeah. And I said, well, what are, what are the things that, and most of the time it's like simple things that they get a ding for. So like, you didn't tell them your name. Like, hey, Scott, this is Priscilla with ABC Trucking. Or you didn't get the driver's name. Or, you didn't ask them, because as a company, how, you kind of customize what you want the score to be. But some of them are real simple questions, like, did you get where they live? What would their geolocation be? Or like things that you would think would be high priority to quote unquote pre-qualified driver on a phone call. They didn't actually ask that question, or they didn't give that feedback, or, but it was very interesting. 61 out of 100. So I just think that's kind of something to take away, and maybe think about if you're a carrier, whether you use a tool like that or not, how are you really looking at identifying performance of recruiters on phone calls with drivers? And are you able to score that? And where do you think your recruiters might land? Because the average right now, based on the data that we have, and this might change, so I could give an update in a few months here, but is 61 out of 100 is what most recruiters scored a 61. That was the average from recruiter and driver phone calls.
Well, here's what I learned about a 61. I was happy that I passed, but my parents didn't look too highly upon a 61. So
yeah, same.
We'll just leave it at that.
Same.
Yeah.
Same.
Well, so here's mine. I actually may probably given a little bit away, because obviously we're here a couple of weeks before finishing the first quarter of 2025. But I went in and looked at our data just to kind of see where things stood with a couple weeks left in the quarter. Looks like our compensation issues are a little up from where they were in the fourth quarter, not by a ton, but up. But I really wanted to see, what drivers were saying in the first part of this year as it related to compensation and kind of where their frustrations were. And we're sitting right now at about 56% of drivers that are frustrated about compensation. 56% of them are saying miles, which is not new. I mean, that's what we've seen really for the last probably, 12 to 18 months, particular as freight has been relatively soft. We know that 2025 hasn't started off, exactly gangbusters, but what I will say, and the reason why I'm bringing this up is actually have a little bit of a recruiting aspect to this. Is I've heard from several carriers in the last, couple weeks that they have seen a pretty decent uptick in freight over the last 2 to 3 weeks into February, first couple weeks of March, which we know that's usually when a lot of the freight starts to pick up a little bit. But there seems to be a little more optimism of where things stand. And I think we've talked about this quite a bit on previous podcasts, but I still don't believe that the rebound in freight, or when things turn back around, is going to be a V shape. I think it's going to be more of a U shape. And I think that, some carriers are going to be experiencing a bump in freight, maybe even before other carriers. And what I would say by looking at this data is two things. Number one is, if you have drivers that are struggling with miles, they should be considered a high turnover risk, first and foremost. Secondly, what I would tell you is, if you're one of those carriers that is starting to see a rebound in your freight, you're starting to see an uptick in your freight, and you realize it's a trend and not a fad, from a recruiting side of things, I would be telling everybody about it, because we know that that's what drivers are looking for. We know, based on our driver surveys, that 81, 82% of drivers are looking for predictable pay. They're looking for predictable miles. So as freight begins to rebound, we know more than half the drivers that are complaining about compensation are still complaining about miles. If you have the freight, you need to let everybody know about it. And if you have drivers that are struggling with miles, you need to know that they are a high turnover risk in this environment, especially.
Yeah. No, that's good stuff. That's a good sneak peek into the data you guys have coming out of this quarter. Okay. So listen, I am very excited. I've been this excited about a guest in a while. We have an amazing guest. Are you ready? You ready to dive
Yeah,
into it? All
I
right,
absolutely am.
let's go. All right. Well, we are honored to have a true leader in the trucking industry with us today. He is President and Chief Executive Officer of the American Trucking Associations, advocating public policy on behalf of the nation's trucking industry. Chris Spear, welcome to the show. We are so excited to have you with us today.
Thanks for having me on.
Yes, listen, the fact Scott and I have been wanting you on for a while. You know, last year we had Andrew Boyle on and he was great. He provided some great insight. And so we've been really excited and we thought what better timing than right now to kind of get your insight on all the things. And we'll kind of dive into that here in a minute. But before we do, why don't you kind of introduce yourself to our listeners and viewers? Tell us a little bit about your journey getting to where you are today as the leader of ATA.
Sure. And thank you both again for having me on. Really has been a journey, 10 years in this role, and I'm the ninth person to fill this privileged occupation to be able to lead an industry like this. ATA has been around for 93 years now. Remarkable. I know there's 3 associations that in 1933 merged to create the American Trucking Association. So we're a 50-state federation. So there's actually 50 of me out there running 50 different state associations. And we're the federation, we're the umbrella that gives them that glue and that voice that is needed here in Washington. And it's grown tremendously over the last 9 decades. And candidly, we've seen an awful lot. An industry that is very enduring, resilient, and hardworking and innovative, I would say as well. I think it's just been an incredible journey for not only trucking, but today's world that we're in and how policies, how legislation, regulations, even courts hear and decide cases is very different than it was, when we were first formed. And so our methods of advocacy start with awareness and education. So podcasts like this are very important to reaching audiences that honestly need to understand our history, our pedigree, but also what we're doing real time on their behalf. And I'm feeling very good about the role. Like I said, 10 years in this, it's been an incredible sea change. I started with the Obama administration on the tail end, Trump 1.0, then Biden, now Trump 2.0. Just, majority minorities of both chambers in Congress and lots of different leaders of the departments and agencies that we work with. So it's making certain that we have not only the pulse and understanding of our industry members, so that our issues that we're advocating on their behalf are real time. We don't want to be chasing things that are no longer relevant or no longer a higher ranking priority. So it's very important that we interact not just with our members to make sure we have that direction, but that we're getting that story in front of the right decision makers, which seem to be always changing here. So it's been an opportunity that I relish. I've enjoyed all 10 years and, looking forward to the future and making certain that we're continuing to represent our members with, every degree of energy that we started with. And we're putting wins on the board despite all that dysfunction. And that gets me up every day.
Yes. As a member of ATA, I can tell you it's been a fun ride with you as the leader. So we really appreciate you and your staff and all your hard work and what you guys do. So we're going to kind of dive into it today, get into some questions for you. We're excited to have you here and get into all the fun stuff, the serious stuff, if you will. But we like to kind of start a little more light, I guess you would say. We like to start with what we call our first 5. And so let's hit our final mile first 5, sponsored by driver.jobs, your destination for hiring the drivers you need for your final mile operations. Driver.jobs, matching the right drivers with the right opportunities for every last mile. Okay, Chris, so we're just going to dive into our first 5. We're going to kind of hit the clock on this. And these are just real quick, I would say lighthearted, fun questions that we have just to get to know you a little bit before we dive into the meat and potatoes of today. So the first question of our first 5 is, we know you travel quite a bit. You probably have quite the points going on. What is your best travel snack? What's your favorite go-to travel snack?
Oh my goodness. Does coffee qualify as a snack? I mean, it
Hey,
starts out
Absolutely.
as, product and liquefied, I guess, but it's liquid gold. I mean, I honestly couldn't start the day or function throughout the day without a little bit of Java in my veins. So I would say, honestly, in lieu of food, that's my go-to.
okay, makes sense.
I can relate to that for sure. So, second question, what is your go-to or your favorite movie?
Oh wow, that's all over the map. I like just all sorts of genres. I have to say I'm a sucker for the 50s films, some of the early 60s films. I just watched Breakfast with Tiffany's last weekend. I just love those older films. Sort of the nostalgia from that is really enjoyable. And I like a number of the new series that I'm watching. 1883, 1923. I'm halfway through that. It just drums up a lot of good images of the country's past. And just I kind of like that era. So that's probably my shtick.
Yeah, you and Scott could hang out. Listen, that y'all
100%.
could have movie night.
All the Yellowstone stuff, I'm
There we go.
100% in.
Yeah. Okay, number 3. If you could instantly become an expert at something, what would it be?
Oh my goodness, an expert. I guess my understanding of the medical field is always an open door. Always amazed at anybody that gets their MD and how many years that go into it for good reason. Obviously, you don't want anyone caring for you that doesn't, know what they're doing. You don't want to be fudging that. So I have a tremendous admiration for the medical field. I think it, unlike other professions like the law and economists and CPAs and so on, all good, all good. But the medical field has always been something that impresses me because you've got to get it right every time. And I don't know, I'm just always fascinated. It's not that I self-medicate. I don't, or diagnose. It just, I've always had an admiration for my general practitioner and what she's able to do. So, it's just a profession that's always impressed me. And it's a giving field. I like that too.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so we're going to go from that high of talking wonderful about the medical community to now asking you, in your opinion, what's the best sandwich?
Oh my gosh, you guys are just killing it today. Well, I don't eat red meat. I can go white, but I would say tuna on wheat is always good. For me, I like that. I'm also a sucker for some of the basics. Just give me a baguette with some ham and maybe some provolone, and I'm just fine. So that's always good too.
Yep.
I will tell you, and Chris, you'll probably really appreciate this. As much as we ask this question with all the folks that come on in trucking, we have learned about the most amazing sandwiches all over the country. I mean, you can just imagine. Yeah. So to our listeners, go back and listen to the first 5. Lots of good sandwiches on the podcast. Okay. The final question for you. What is the most used app on your phone?
Oh, wow. I guess, does SMS count?
Sure.
Yeah, obviously I'm texting probably more than I'm emailing, even calling. So it's just a long string of different conversations with different people that are almost overlapping and to the point where it's almost hard to make sure that I'm in the right string with what I'm saying. I've had that happen a few times. People get things from me. I was like, what do you mean to send this? But, I am in United app probably for travel more than any other. Maybe that with Marriott, Bonvoy. Those two are I'm my own scheduler when it comes to travel arrangements. And I do that purposely because when you're out in the field on the weekend or late at night and a flight gets canceled or room's no longer available, whatever, I mean, you've got to be able to fix the problem on your own very quickly. And so I just maintain those things myself. So I'm on that when I'm traveling very regularly. But I would say in terms of news, I bounce around. I'd say CNN, bit of Fox, CNBC, Bloomberg. Those are probably my go-tos for news. And BBC, I like very much. Less opinion and more reporting. I like that. So I kind of bounce around. I read a lot. Politico is a constant. I probably have 6 of those lined up. They kick in right at 6 a.m. So I always have my go-tos and filling me in on my departments and what's going on around town. So yeah, they usually start the day with that and then progress into the rest. But yeah, I'd say those are all probably pretty repeat routine apps that I use daily.
Wow. Well, you certainly cover the gamut. So really appreciate that. That'll get you out of the first five, so we can now
Okay.
jump into the stuff that I think a lot of the folks that are tuning in today probably want to get your thoughts and insight on. So just kind of starting out, I have a little bit of a political background. I worked in Washington on Capitol Hill at the end of the 90s, and then spent a little bit of time working for a member of Congress before I got into trucking. And so very few people actually have the opportunity to sit down and talk with a U.S. president. And you've had that opportunity. You had a chance to meet and talk with President Trump last year. Just kind of in general, what stood out to you about that experience, and either from a policy or a leadership perspective?
Well, it was an interesting meeting. It was in June, and I remember it well because it was 2 days roughly after the judge had made a decision to convict him in New York. We weren't entirely sure that the meeting was going to go forward as a result of that. I thought, for certain, his mind's going to be in other priorities and so on. He kept his schedule. He kept our meeting, and it was an hour meeting that went over 2 hours. And obviously he touched on that decision. We had very, very little time spent on it. It was really, a conversation that centered on our issues, what my members are seeing, feeling, experiencing day in, day out. And he genuinely was very interested in, everything from environmental to workforce development issues, as well as some of the pain that we're experiencing from frivolous lawsuits. And if there's anybody that's, familiar with time in the courts, he certainly has been over the last few months. And, I think the conversation was very productive. And it just really impressed me that he was that focused and spent, double the time that was budgeted for the meeting with me and my members.
That's
That's
very
great.
cool. Yeah, that's very cool. So with the new Trump administration, as you referred to it, Trump 2.0 in place, obviously there's a shift in regulatory priorities. So from your perspective, what key policies or regulations do you anticipate having the greatest impact on our industry in the next 4 years?
Well, most certainly, I think the environmental agenda that was really, we really witnessed a lot of momentum under the 4 years of the Biden administration, and not necessarily instigated by the federal EPA or the White House. It was they're just basically granting, the state of California, namely the California Air Resources Board, or CARB, as we refer to it. It's an unelected board of bureaucrats and environmental interests. There's no business interests represented at CARB. Again, unelected. I want to stress that. And folks that just really have a bone to pick with industries, including ours. And the last administration basically gave carte blanche authority to CARB to set the national standards. So in a sense, CARB became the national environmental enforcer. The federal EPA resides in Sacramento. And the timelines, the targets they put forward to convert our industry, fleets, trucks, equipment, over to zero emissions. And there's really no such thing. All trucks, including EV trucks, have a carbon footprint. In fact, there's more carbon expended creating a EV truck than a diesel. So a brand new diesel. So just because you got to mine the materials and so on, a lot of it is very, very intensive in terms of production. That all counts. But because they made it a tailpipe emissions requirement, none of that on the front end counted against the EV. So that's how they got around that. And just by 2030, having to adopt 10% of our fleets year over year and phase diesels and diesel fuel out. Where's the charging infrastructure? We don't even have it for cars, let alone commercial vehicles. Where's the power that's supposed to flow through it, especially in states like California that suffer from rolling blackouts already? Where are the minerals being resourced for these massive 16,000-pound batteries? It's coming from China and it's coming from the Congo. I mean, we need to be sourcing this stuff from reliable partners or here at home. And that's not going to happen in 5, 6 years. And then, the cost parity, we're talking 3.5 times more for an EV truck than a brand new diesel, which, by the way, emits 98.5% less than it did 4 years ago. In fact, 60 trucks today, emit what one truck emitted in 1988. That's how far we've come. And so we have a really good story to tell there. And just taking brand new diesels off the market seems to me to while we have no infrastructure or power or minerals sourced here at home, like a fool's errand. And, obviously, it takes you to the operational cost comparisons. 15 minutes to fuel a diesel truck to go 1,200 miles. It takes 6 to 8 hours to charge an EV commercial vehicle equivalent to go about 200 miles at best. 6 to 8 hours. I mean, imagine that, the cycle of men and women drivers that have to operate that equipment. You'll need 3 drivers for what we use for one diesel today. And we're already short on talent. So this is a compounding effect that if you look at the panacea of issues and challenges, it's just not ready for prime time. And I'm not negative on electric or any other source of energy. I'm just saying, don't convert our entire industry in 5, 6 years to something that doesn't exist. Because, 83% of the communities in this country rely on trucks. We're serving 72.5% of the domestic freight. And you got a lot of people working for us, 8.5 million strong. That's 1 in 18 jobs in the United States, where the top job in 29 states is in trucking. So there's nothing that you and I eat, drink, or wear that didn't come off a truck. And there's a mom, dad, there's a husband, there's a wife that was responsible for making that happen. And all the people in the background, from the dock workers to the dispatch folks, these are all hardworking people that make our industry so strong. And, you deal with recruiting, you deal with talent, you want to invest in people. This is a high touch industry. And it's the people behind the scenes that make the success of trucking what it is today. And, to convert it over with, blindly by people that are unelected and have no business background. They've never, handled a cash flow statement. They've never had P&L. They've never had to fire anybody. They have no idea what trucking is all about. They're sitting in cubicles in Sacramento making decisions that impact our entire economy and what we all pay for the things, not just what we want, but what we need, including prescriptions, medications. These are all things that rely on our industry, and they're playing chicken with it. And so this is the issue set that keeps me up at night. And I feel that this EPA, this White House is going to, and Congress for that matter, are going to take some very aggressive steps in the coming days to pull a lot of that California garbage down. It's not the United States of California. We need one standard for all 50 states and not let the left coast dictate what the rest of the country does just because they've got a high, environmental, lobby that is really focused on, going to net zero. I think we all want clean air and water, but there's a responsible, common sense way to do it. And this is not it.
You kind of mentioned the EPA. Have you met with Administrator Zeldin? I mean, has he kind of given any indications on, pausing some of these, restrictions or anything coming out of the previous administration?
Yeah, all real time, actually. Last week, they reopened Greenhouse Gas 3 for comments. So we're going to revise that, update it, and hopefully put in some common sense language that is achievable, most importantly. We helped with Greenhouse Gas 1 and 2. We've been at the table for 40 years with EPA. And so to dismiss EPA's role and defer to California, I thought was not only a fool's errand, it was very politically motivated. The White House under Biden knew that to move faster towards zero emissions, giving the keys to California was a win-win. If they failed, they can blame California. If they succeeded, they pleased everybody. But they didn't have to deal with it here in Washington. That's a very reckless way to govern. And so I think having this EPA pull that back, take control, most importantly, and put in responsible, achievable, common sense provisions will be good. I'd say next week or the week following, the House and Senate will vote to pull down the Advanced Clean Truck, as well as the NOx, the nitrogen oxide waivers as well in California. So these are all positive things that are happening real time, and I believe are going to have a lasting impact. And once those are pulled down, by the way, in Congress, you can't replace them forever. No matter who the administration is, you can't replace it with a similar or identical rule. So this is a tool that can only be used when you have the majorities and the votes to pass it. And I definitely believe we've got a president who will sign it.
Okay. That's great. That was fantastic. So driver experience is at the heart of recruiting and retention efforts, which is something we deal with. And one of the ongoing challenges that I'm sure you're aware of is the critical shortage of truck parking. What steps maybe are currently being taken at the policy level to address that issue? And maybe how can industry leaders that are listening to this support those efforts to improve parking availability for drivers?
Well, I mentioned this is a high touch business, and I love what you both do, what you bring to this industry and attracting talent and selling the value proposition is very important. I didn't mention, however, that this is the issue set I cut my teeth on. I actually ran the labor committee in the Senate, went over as Assistant Secretary of Labor under George W. Bush. So workforce policy issues are something near and dear. Employment and training, particularly, are issues. Beyond that, obviously, safety and health. So these are all issues that I spent, my younger days in the Hill and in the administration dealing with, and they're all encompassing. And it's always fascinating to me how labor issues pull the strings of other issue sets that are important to trucking, such as infrastructure. So here you have truck parking. It's an infrastructure issue, obviously. There's one spot for every 11 drivers. They spend roughly 56 minutes a day on average looking for a parking spot. They're required to rest. We want them to rest. We don't want our drivers, experiencing fatigue. That puts themselves and the motoring public at risk. But when they can't find that parking spot, they burn an awful lot of time trying to find it. And that equates to about $6,500 to $6,800 a year in lost wages because they're just spent time looking for parking. That's just flat out wrong. And that's when we end up seeing trucks, trailers parked on shoulders and on and off ramps and overpasses. I mean, it's insane. They're required to do it and you can't punish them for that. Yeah, law enforcement, is directing them to move. And, it's kind of a violent conflict between federal, state, and local laws. And we need basic parking for them to take that rest that they're required at the federal level to do. It becomes a workforce issue, not only because these drivers spend so much time that they could be driving and earning, looking for parking. It's a frustration. I'd be sitting there if it were me and just thinking, gosh, I could probably be doing something different with my life than this. This is really frustrating. But if you talk to women, we have an 8% women driver pool. We're growing, but that is nothing to be proud of. Europe has 3%. That's even worse. So I guess we're ahead of them, but I don't brag about 8. I think it needs to be at least half, 50%. I'd love to see it get to that point. It's a great career, great pay, great benefits. And I think there's a future there. But if you talk to women about the impediments, the first and foremost issue they raise is safe, secure, well-lit truck parking. And so here's a workforce issue. That's an infrastructure issue. It's also a safety and security issue. So all these things bleed into workforce development. And so you've got to fix a number of these to make that happen and grow your talent pool if you want to be successful. So these are all things that we're doing simultaneously. And I think they're going to have a lasting impact on bringing in new talent long term that's going to reshape and grow our industry for the better.
Yes, that's great. So, as you just mentioned, and we kind of touched on, our audience is typically made up of recruiting and retention professionals, primarily drivers. Some folks also, just come in from just a general HR perspective. But we always like to ask our guests, if you had a room of driver recruiting and retention professionals, which in essence you do, what message would you have for them? What do you believe is the most important thing for them right now in the trucking industry today if they're trying to recruit and retain drivers?
Well, I think you always have to do, I like to refer to it as VOC, voice of the customer. And in this sense, it's talent. It's retaining good talent is key. The ones that you have already in our driver force or technicians, people that grow from the industry into those roles, for instance, we want to keep them. And so you got to listen to those folks. You got to constantly survey them to understand What are their likes and dislikes? Obviously flexibility comes to mind, especially with drivers. They want to be home. Some of them are now saying outright that they'll take less pay in order for them to have that flexibility to be home with their kids, whether it be t-ball or dance recitals. It doesn't matter. They want to be there for that. And long haul is a very stressful job. It pays more for that reason, but it's not for everybody. So as you get married, you have kids, those things start to weigh in on your priorities, and balancing that is very important within our industry. Beyond that, I think technicians are going to have an opportunity to really expand their portfolio from traditional wrench turning to software diagnostics. I think there's a lot in the areas of AI that are going to be impactful throughout the industry, but certainly in terms of the operations of the equipment. And I also think automation will play a role. I do not view it as a displacement issue nor a threat to our workforce. We already have a shortage of talent. I actually think it's going to help in terms of workforce development. I think the long haul, there are lanes, particularly in the Southwest from Texas to California, where this equipment's already being operated that can regularly run those routes long haul without people, maybe in the future. And, channel those folks that are doing those runs, those lanes to more regional and local, where they can be home and enjoy that flexibility that I just mentioned. So, you're offsetting one for the other, and that's a win-win, and you're moving more freight at the same time. So long as no one's losing their job, I think it's a really good approach to take. And you're not going to see that equipment running nationally, especially where I'm from in Wyoming. The wind, the sleet, the snow, those conditions, that technology is going to take a long time to develop, overcome those types of conditions, those elements. So, but where it can operate, I think it could be helpful, but it's not going to displace anybody in my view. I really love this issue set. And I think, listening to the people that are in these jobs helps you really understand how to recruit better. You're looking for talent that understands what they're getting into, and changing those conditions makes the newer talent, less likely to complain and more excited about being a part of trucking. So, I think you've got to focus on the existing workforce before you focus on bringing in people that are new. And that order, I think, is going to really create some energy within trucking that, just makes us, the go-to for freight movement, and people rely on us. And they also, need to know that there's a face behind that wheel, that there's a face of industry. It's not just trucks and brands going down the road, that there is 8.5 million people making that happen. So very proud to represent it. And I think everybody that contributes to this industry, recruiting people that understand what they're getting into and are excited to get up every day and go to work, that's what makes people want to be a part of trucking.
I didn't realize you were from Wyoming. That's literally one of my favorite states. Get up to Jackson Holes with the Grand Tetons. I'm set. That's my place to go. So
very good.
So big question here. Obviously, focus kind of around the economy. No secret, the last couple of years have been challenging from a freight standpoint. Coming off of the COVID boom. Kind of from your perspective, the year maybe has started a little bit slower than I think a lot of people maybe were thinking. I think there was a lot of optimism coming into 2025, and it started how most years start from a freight standpoint. It was a little slower. What are you seeing from a freight market standpoint, and maybe kind of on top of that, lots of talk about tariffs, particularly with Canada and Mexico. And here at the beginning of April, we're going to have potentially some reciprocal tariffs based on some of what the president is saying. What kind of effect maybe do you see that having on the freight market? And maybe what are you seeing as we get through the rest of this year, what the economy is going to look like, and maybe what you're hoping or expecting to happen?
Well, I think first and foremost, nobody should be surprised that President Trump is talking about tariffs. He used them during, his first administration, his first term, and he campaigned, and is now using them again. So if anybody's shocked that he's actually doing what he says, you probably don't know this president or administration very well. So we were shocked by that. I think our focus isn't the if he's going to use them. We know that answer. It's how long. It's the duration. How much pain does an industry like ours have to experience before we get, this corrected? I'm also quick to point out that USMCA was an agreement forged under the first Trump administration. It was the replacement of the 1994 NAFTA agreement, which no question was tired, was in need of an upgrade. And they did that. And it was hailed at that time as a huge, tremendous, achievement. Now it's awful. So, wow, have, things changed in 4 or 5 years. It's up for review next year. By all accounts, it's probably going to be reopened much sooner than that. It is a trilateral agreement between 3 nations. It's not between the U.S. and, say, Ontario. So, we just hosted our Mexican and Canadian colleagues, our association equivalents, and a number of members from all 3 countries. And we had a number of speakers from the Mexican ambassador to Customs and Border Patrol. So we really looked at the spectrum of the issues. It was interesting to me that a lot of the rhetoric that's being put out there on social media and by the president himself is how it's perceived by Mexico and Canada. I think they're behaving a little bit differently in response to that. Mexico is taking more of a subsurface approach. Their president is really putting results, where it matters and not putting it out on social media. She revisits regularly with the president about the things that he wanted to see done, such as, obviously illegal immigration and human trafficking, to illegal drugs such as fentanyl, but also free and fair trade. Canada's a little bit different story. They've taken a much more approach in the media and being much more combative with the president. I don't personally view that's going to get you very far. We certainly don't take that approach. When we have a disagreement, we go behind closed doors and we have a conversation. I'm not going to air that on social media. I've got too many other priorities. We mentioned environmental, workforce development issues. I don't want to impede our ability to get those things done because I'm picking a fight over an issue that could easily be managed behind the scenes. So I see Mexico doing a little bit more of that like we would. And it seems to be paying off for them. I do hope that if there continues to be disagreement, that it doesn't continue long. That duration really is the pain point that we want to watch. We're moving 76% of the USMCA freight by truck. So that's a big number. And so whether it's the autos or the ag industry, we're moving that. And so, a lot of them are getting pretty vocal out of the gate. We're feeling it, no question. I think that continues to escalate the longer this goes. So my point is if you got a problem with USMCA and you don't like the terms and conditions of that agreement, then get your butts to the table and figure it out and stop inflicting the pain, not just on industries like mine, but consumers like you who are going to see an increase in what they're paying for if this continues. So at some point you have to sheathe the sword and you need to get back to the table and figure it out. We can't do that for you. So that would be my message to all 3 is stop complaining and figure it out.
That's fantastic, Chris. And listen, we can't thank you enough for taking time out of what I know is a very busy schedule for you to join us today. I know that the folks tuning in today are going to take a lot of from what you've said and from what you've told us. And we appreciate your insight. And who knows, maybe here near the end of the year, first of next year, we can have you back on and see where things stand as we figure out what's going to happen the rest of this year. But we really, really appreciate you joining us. We really appreciate your insight and hope to have you back here very soon.
Absolutely. Happy to do it. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks.
Wow, what a great conversation with Chris Spear. That was good. I can't wait to have him on again already. Yeah, I'm like, I can think of other things to ask him.
Lots to take away, a lot of notes that I took on that. So I think there's enough there for everybody to chew on for a little bit for sure.
Yes, for sure. Well, thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this conversation like we did, please give us a virtual high five by leaving a rating and review on your favorite podcast platform. And be sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss out on one of our latest episodes.
And if you got any questions or feedback, you can reach out to us on social media or you can drop us an email at the email address in the show notes. And if you're seeing this on social media, forward this along. Help a brother and a sister out here. We want to get this, get the word out about the resource. And obviously this was a great interview. So help us out by sharing this on social media as well. So we'll be back next time with more fun, data, and insights to help you master your recruiting and retention game. Hope everybody has a great day, and we will see you next month.